Some days start like any other. The alarm blares, the coffee maker hisses, a mournful tune, and you steel yourself for the relentless tide of corporate mediocrity. For me, Mark, a network architect, that morning was no different. I'd spent months, years even, hunched over schematics, wrestling with code, and dreaming in bandwidth. My mission? To build something better, something not just faster, not just more secure, but a fundamental leap forward. And I'd done it. I designed a network architecture so elegant, so efficient, it was like finally seeing the blueprint for a perfectly ordered universe. I presented it to my boss, Walter. Walter. The man was less a manager and more a walking, talking collection of buzzwords and polished lies. His hairline receded faster than his integrity, and his ego was a black hole that consumed all light and decency. He nodded, all forced smiles and empty praise, nodding like a bobblehead on a particularly bumpy highway. He saw my design, he heard my projections, he felt the undeniable shift in potential. And his eyes, those beady little eyes, lit up not with admiration for innovation, but with the cold, hard glint of avarice. He saw not a breakthrough, but a commodity. "Remarkable work, Mark," he'd purred, leaning back in his faux leather chair, which probably cost more than my annual salary. A testament to the power of collaboration. Truly, this is what teamwork makes the dream work is all about. Teamwork! The word landed like a lead balloon in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office. My design, my late nights, my personal investment of time and soul, my early drafts scribbled on napkins at 3 a.m., my endless email chains with vendors tweaking parameters, my private digital diary meticulously chronicling every iteration, every problem, every solution. All of it suddenly was team effort. As if Walter himself had spent his weekends hunched over a soldering iron or debugging Python scripts. It was a joke, a cruel, soul-crushing joke. He, along with HR's resident dragon lady, Brenda, who had a smile as warm as a tax audit and a penchant for using HR jargon as a weapon, proceeded to dismantle my contribution. "It's just part of your role, Mark." Brenda had chirped, her voice dripping with syrupy insincerity. "We all pitch in. It's about synergy. Aligning our strategic objectives." Strategic objectives. Their objective was clear: take credit, minimize the source, and prepare for the kill shot. Brenda's smile, usually as fixed as a taxidermied cat, seemed to widen just a millimeter as she delivered her platitudes, each word laced with the venom of corporate doublespeak. And the kill shot came swift and silent, like a poisoned dart from a tribal hunter. A few weeks later, after I'd been subtly sidelined, my projects quietly reassigned to less capable individuals who offered Walter better golf opportunities, I received the dreaded calendar invite. Performance review and strategic realignment discussion. The subject line alone was a kiss of death. You know that feeling, right? That knot in your stomach, the cold sweat that prickles your neck? It's the universal corporate signal for you're about to be ejected from the mothership and you won't get a parachute. I walked into the conference room, a sterile box designed to feel both intimidating and impersonal. Walter was there, looking unnervingly pleased with himself, his tie perfectly knotted, a pristine folder resting on the polished table. Brenda sat beside him, her expression a practiced mask of sympathetic neutrality, her pen poised like a surgeon's scalpel. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with network performance and everything to do with impending severance. "Mark," Walter began, his voice smooth as butter on a nonstick pan, the kind that slides off your toast and lands on the floor. "We've been reviewing performance metrics across the board. And while your technical contributions have been noted," he paused, letting the insinuation hang in the air like cheap air freshener trying to mask a sewage leak. "We feel that your skill set might be better aligned with opportunities outside the company at this time, to explore new horizons, as it were." Brenda chimed in, "This is not a reflection of your character, Mark, but rather a strategic decision based on evolving departmental needs. It's about redundancy. We're streamlining." Redundancy. The word echoed in the silence, a hollow, corporate drumbeat. They were firing me. Me, the guy who'd practically built this digital infrastructure from the ground up. The guy who'd personally rerouted power cables during the great blackout of '08, who'd spent a weekend at home troubleshooting a server crash that would have cost them millions, who'd taught Brenda how to use the damn VPN. And they were calling me redundant. It was like telling a heart surgeon he was redundant because the patient stopped breathing. They handed me a severance package, a flimsy piece of paper with more legalistic mumbo-jumbo than a medieval decree. It included a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad it could probably withstand a nuclear blast. And then, the kicker, they demanded the return of all company property. Laptop, phone, badge, keys, the usual song and dance. I handed them my laptop, my company phone, my badge. The keys felt heavy in my hand, each one a tiny monument to my years of quiet labor. I even handed over the small, perfectly functional prototype of my new network architecture that I'd been tinkering with at home. It was a beautiful little piece of engineering, a miniature marvel of miniaturized connectivity. I'd kept it at home, a personal project, a labor of love, or so I thought. A foolish sentiment, I now realized. It was a beautiful, gleaming decoy. As I walked out of that office, the sterile air replaced by the crisp, indifferent breath of the outside world, I didn't feel anger. Not really. Anger is loud, messy, and ultimately unproductive. Anger is for the amateurs who react. What I felt was a cold, clinical clarity. They thought they'd erased me. They thought they'd taken my work, silenced my voice, and tossed me onto the street like a broken piece of hardware. They were wrong. So very, very wrong. See, Walter and Brenda, in their infinite, self-serving wisdom, had made a fatal error. They'd underestimated the quiet architect. They'd mistaken meticulousness for meekness and documentation for drudgery. They believed that a signature on an NDA meant silence. They were wrong. Because while I'd handed over the company laptop, I'd also handed them a carefully constructed illusion. The real archive wasn't on their servers. It was in my personal cloud, encrypted, compartmentalized, and backed up on more hard drives than Walter had, golf trophies. Every draft, every email, every meeting note, every whispered concern from a colleague about Walter's shady dealings, every late-night debugging session logged on my personal machine, it was all there. A digital diary of my genius, meticulously curated, time-stamped, and irrefutable. And that little prototype I'd handed over? A decoy. The real, functional, groundbreaking prototype? Safely tucked away in a reinforced case in my home office, humming with the promise of a comeback. I didn't go home and drown my sorrows in cheap whiskey. I went home and opened my personal laptop. The hum of my own custom-built server, a much more potent machine than anything they had at the office, was a comforting sound, a lullaby of imminent justice. I logged into my secure cloud storage. The interface glowed, familiar and powerful. I navigated through folders labeled with cryptic project names: Phoenix, Nightingale, Project Chimera. These weren't just files, they were the bones of my innovation, the blueprints of my revenge. I scrolled through years of meticulous record keeping, early schematics annotated with my own scrawled notes. Walter's idea? No, that's stupid. Let's try X instead. Emails to Brenda, politely correcting her misinterpretations of technical jargon, each one a tiny nail in her coffin. Meeting minutes where I, the silent architect, was always positioned at the back, taking notes while Walter took the credit. I found the original patent application drafts, the ones they'd never seen, the ones that clearly stated my sole authorship. I even found the email from a venture capitalist friend sent years ago expressing interest in licensing the concept if I ever decided to strike out on my own. That email was a little gold nugget, a forgotten promise of future leverage. The betrayal stung, yes, the injustice burned, but beneath it, a new feeling began to take root. The quiet, steely resolve of a man who knows he's been wronged and who has the tools to set it right. Walter and Brenda thought they'd put out the fire. But they hadn't. They'd just driven the embers underground, waiting for the right moment to ignite. And that moment, I knew, was fast approaching. They had the patent paperwork, sure, the one they'd forced me to sign over under duress, but they didn't have the truth. They didn't have the timeline. They didn't have the undeniable, irrefutable evidence of my creation. They had a stolen painting. I had the artist studio, the sketches, the inspiration, and the confession. I sat back, the glow of the monitor illuminating my determined face. They'd fired me. They'd stolen my life's work. They'd probably already filed the patent under their own names, or worse, under the company's name, with their fingerprints all over it. But they had no idea what they were up against. They thought they were dealing with a disgruntled employee. They were about to find out they'd provoked a meticulously documented digital reckoning. The counterplay was already in motion. They'd made their move. Now, it was my turn. They thought they'd won. Walter and Brenda, basking in their ill-gotten glory, probably already planning the company's next acquisition based on my groundbreaking network architecture. They'd counted on the NDA, the severance package, the sheer exhaustion of fighting a behemoth like their company. They expected me to fade away, a disgruntled ex-employee nursing a bruised ego. They were wrong. My home office, once a sanctuary for innovation, now felt like a war room. The custom-built server hummed softly, a comforting lullaby of potential energy. I'd spent the last few days not wallowing, but meticulously cataloging. Every email sent, every meeting note, every design iteration, every late-night Slack conversation with a trusted colleague who'd hint at Walter's creative accounting practices. My personal cloud storage was a fortress, defended by layers of encryption and two-factor authentication. I pulled up the original patent drafts, the ones filed before Walter's forced collaboration narrative took hold. Each one was timestamped, digitally signed, and clearly attributed to me, Mark Jensen, solely. Then came the communications with the venture capitalist, a discreet back-channel conversation years ago about licensing my ideas. That email, a forgotten beacon of potential, was now a critical piece of leverage. I had evidence of their intent to steal, their methodology, and my solitary creation. Walter had been particularly proud of his teamwork presentation. I unearthed the audio recording from that very meeting, captured by a discreet device I always kept charged for just such eventualities. His oily praise, Brenda's corporate jargon-laden dismissal of my individual contribution, it was all there, a perfect soundbite of their greed. And the prototype, the one I'd reluctantly handed over, a masterfully crafted decoy. The real one, the fully functional, bleeding-edge iteration, sat secured in a Faraday cage, humming with quiet power. I'd even planted a subtle back door in the decoy, a tiny piece of code that would activate and send a ping to my private server if it was ever powered on and connected to a network, a digital tripwire. The first inkling that my absence was felt came not through a direct communication, but through a panicked text from Sarah, a junior engineer I'd mentored. "Mark, are you okay? The entire East Wing network is down. Nobody can log in. Walter's losing it. Says it's a system anomaly." An anomaly, I smiled. It wasn't an anomaly. It was the absence of my meticulous maintenance. The system was designed to be robust, but it also relied on subtle, ongoing optimizations that only I knew how to perform. They'd been running it on autopilot, and now, without my touch, the intricate machinery was seizing. Another message, this time from David in accounting. "Dude, massive client complaint from Etheria Solutions. Their entire transaction system is frozen. They're threatening to pull their contract." Walter's in damage control mode. Brenda's talking about unforeseen technical difficulties. The dominoes were falling precisely as I'd envisioned. They'd underestimated the dependency they had on my expertise, a dependency they'd actively tried to obscure. Their arrogance had blinded them to the fact that they hadn't just fired an employee, they'd amputated a vital organ. I could almost feel the panic radiating from their sterile offices. Internal emails, forwarded discreetly by a still loyal colleague, painted a grim picture. Subject line screamed, "Critical system failure, urgent action required, network outage impact assessment, and immediate repair protocols, initiate now. Walter, the master of spin," was reduced to begging for solutions he couldn't comprehend. Brenda was probably drafting an apology letter to the entire client base, laced with enough legalese to make a lawyer blush. They were in chaos. They had no idea what was happening or why. They were scrambling, pointing fingers, and likely desperately trying to replicate my work with their own clueless technicians. This was the perfect moment to apply pressure. Not a roar, but a whisper. I drafted a simple email. No accusations, no threats, just a polite inquiry. I sent it to Walter, Brenda, and the entire executive team, including the CEO. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding network architecture and IP ownership." Inside, I kept it brief and professional. I explained that in light of recent system instability, I felt compelled to offer my expertise should it be of any assistance. I then posed a single, carefully worded question. As the sole architect and developer of the proprietary network architecture currently in use, I would appreciate clarification on the current licensing and ownership agreements in place given my termination without cause. I didn't attach any proof. Not yet. I didn't need to. The mere mention of sole architect and developer and IP ownership in such a context, especially with the word termination without cause hanging in the air, would be enough to send a shiver down their spine. It was a precise surgical strike, a single, well-placed question designed to detonate their carefully constructed lie. I also forwarded a copy of that email with a concise explanation of the situation and my documented proof to a carefully chosen contact at the National Intellectual Property Rights Association, a regulatory body known for its swift action against patent infringement. I didn't ask them to investigate. I simply informed them of a potential dispute regarding intellectual property ownership, attaching only the initial patent filings that clearly established my sole authorship. The trap was sprung. They had their own crisis, and now a formal query that hinted at legal entanglements. They couldn't ignore it, and they certainly couldn't answer it truthfully without implicating themselves. The silence from their end was deafening. but the frantic messages from Sarah and David escalated. Walter was reportedly in meetings with legal counsel. Brenda was seen pacing the hallways, her face a mask of growing dread. They knew they were in trouble. They knew I was the cause of it. But they still didn't understand the full depth of the hole they dug for themselves. They thought this was a technical glitch. They were about to discover it was a meticulously planned legal takedown. The quiet architect had just declared war. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken panic. For 3 days, my inbox remained blessedly quiet from the company's official channels, save for automated system notifications confirming receipt of my inquiry. But the whispers grew louder. Sarah texted again, her messages shorter, more urgent. Walter's been in and out of meetings all day. Brenda looks sick. They're saying the SEC is involved. The SEC. My small inquiry to the IP Rights Association had clearly triggered a chain reaction. When a company is suspected of patent infringement and significant system failures cripple their operations, regulatory bodies take notice. The mention of sole architect and termination without cause was a siren call to them. They were scrambling, not just to fix the network, but to contain a potential scandal. Then the call came. Not a professional communication, not an email, but a personal cell phone number I hadn't seen in months. Walter. His voice, usually smooth and condescending, was strained, bordering on desperate. Mark, it's Walter. We need to talk. Immediately. Can you come in? I chuckled, a low, dry sound. Come in, Walter. To what? Exactly. The office you fired me from? Or perhaps the executive conference room where you stole my life's work? A sharp intake of breath on his end. Mark, please. This isn't about what happened. This is about business continuity. The systems are in complete disarray. Etheria is suing us for breach of contract. The SEC is asking questions. We're looking at millions in damages, possibly criminal charges for fraud if this gets out. He was admitting it, albeit indirectly. The facade was crumbling. Business continuity, I mused. Funny, that's what I tried to ensure with my work. Perhaps if you'd valued it then, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Mark, we can fix this, Walter pleaded, his voice cracking. We'll make it right. We're prepared to offer you a substantial compensation package. Reinstatement, a significant raise, equity, anything you want. Just help us get the systems back online. The bait was dangled. The desperate offer of a lifeline. I pictured him sweating in his expensive suit, his perfectly coiffed hair probably askew, the weight of his ruin pressing down on him. It was almost too easy. I decided to meet him. Not at the office, of course. A neutral location. A quiet cafe on the other side of town. A place so removed from our corporate world it might as well have been on another planet. I arrived early, ordered a black coffee, and waited. Walter arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard. He sat opposite me, his eyes darting around nervously, his expensive loafers scuffing the floor. Brenda was conspicuously absent, probably hiding under her desk, or perhaps being debriefed by legal. So, Walter, I began, my voice calm and measured, cutting through his fidgeting. You want to make it right. Let's be clear about what it is. You and Brenda stole my design. You claimed it as your own, fired me to silence me, and proceeded to run my invention into the ground with your incompetence. Now, you're facing ruin. And you're asking me, the architect of the very system you dismantled, to save your necks. I leaned forward, placing my coffee cup on the table with deliberate care. I have all the proof, Walter. The original patent filings, my private logs, timestamps of every line of code, every email proving my sole authorship, the decoy prototype's ping confirming its activation, indicating you tried to use it, and of course your own panicked calls and emails acknowledging the situation. I've already provided enough to the relevant authorities to launch a full investigation into IP theft and corporate negligence. I laid out the two options, not as negotiations, but as a verdict. Option A, I said, my gaze steady. You, Walter, and Brenda resign immediately. Effective today, you provide a sworn statement admitting to the theft and your role in my wrongful termination. The company will issue a public statement acknowledging my sole ownership and contribution. You will then be severely reprimanded by the board, facing a lifetime ban from any executive position in this industry. The company will pay a modest settlement for my reinstatement with a significant title and a substantial raise, enough to recognize my past and future contributions. Walter started to protest. A public statement? Reinstatement? Mark, you can't. And option B, I interrupted, my voice firm. You refuse. The SEC investigation proceeds. Etheria sues. The company faces crippling fines, potential bankruptcy, and you will both face criminal charges for fraud and IP theft, with your names plastered across every business publication for the foreseeable future. The company will be forced to buy back my IP at an astronomical figure to avoid complete collapse, a figure that will likely bankrupt it, and I will personally pursue every legal avenue to ensure you are never employed in this industry again. I let the silence hang, the weight of my words settling heavily between us. Walter's face was ashen. He looked like a man who had just seen his entire life's work, built on a foundation of lies, crumble to dust. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can," I replied, my tone unwavering. "And I will, if you force my hand. You underestimated me, Walter. You saw a cog in the machine. You failed to recognize that the machine was built by me, and I know every wire, every circuit, every vulnerability." He swallowed hard, his eyes unfocused. He was calculating the fallout, the personal ruin, the shame. What kind of settlement are we talking about for option A, for buying you back, as you call it? I smiled, a small, grim smile. "The company will acquire exclusive licensing rights to my architecture for a period of 5 years. A lump sum payment to me equivalent to the projected profits of that architecture over that period, plus compensation for my wrongful termination, my emotional distress, and my time lost. A figure that will ensure the company's survival, but also reflect the true value of what you stole. And an additional bonus for me to oversee the system's reintegration, ensuring its stability under my guidance." I paused, letting the numbers sink in. "Let's say $50 million, and your immediate resignations." Walter recoiled as if struck. 50 million. It was a staggering sum, far more than he'd ever imagined. But he also understood it was a fraction of what it would cost to rebuild from scratch, or worse, to face the complete annihilation of his career and reputation. He fumbled for his phone, his hand shaking. He didn't even need to discuss it with Brenda. This was his to break. He made a call, his voice a strained whisper. "Get legal on the line, now. Tell them it's an emergency. We need to discuss a licensing agreement. And prepare resignation papers for myself and Brenda. Immediate. Effective today." The resolution was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the official announcement was made. Walter and Brenda had resigned due to personal matters. The company issued a press release acknowledging the unforeseen system complexities and welcoming back their original architect, Mark Jensen, to oversee a critical infrastructure upgrade. They didn't mention theft. They didn't mention IP. But the board knew, the SEC knew, and I knew. The settlement was finalized, a hefty sum deposited into my account. I didn't return to my old role. Instead, I became a consultant, reporting directly to the CEO, with an ironclad contract guaranteeing my autonomy and ownership over future developments. The company, humbled and chastened, paid top dollar for my expertise and my silence. Walter and Brenda vanished. Rumors circulated about them living abroad, stripped of their fortunes and their reputations. Their brief reign of arrogance had ended in spectacular, deserved failure. As for me, I'd reclaimed my work, my reputation, and my dignity. The quiet architect had proven that meticulous documentation and unwavering resolve could dismantle even the most entrenched corporate corruption. I had the satisfaction of seeing my invention thrive, not under the guise of stolen glory, but under its rightful owner. If watching corporate hubris meet its match through calculated precision resonates with you, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. We've got more stories of quiet competence crushing corruption just for you. And remember, sometimes the most powerful tool in business isn't a fancy title or a corner office, but a well-kept diary and a firm understanding of contract law. That's how you truly win.